Hello. On behalf of the Aberdeen Performing Arts and Festival partners, welcome to Granite Noir. I'm Janet Smith, and I programme for children in schools at the Bath, Boswell and Dublin Literature Festivals. And I'm delighted you've joined us for this event with Katherine Rundell, which is part of the digital staging of Aberdeen's International Crime Writing Festival. And today's event is being BSL interpreted by Leslie Crerar, so thank you, Leslie. I am delighted to introduce Katherine Rundell. She's an author of 5 novels which have won some very important awards. But more importantly for us as the readers, these are stories of adventure, of mystery, of courageous young characters that take us on exciting journeys to places such as Paris in Rooftopper, the snowy wilds of Russia in the Wolf Wilder, the Amazon in the Explorer. But now, in her latest book, which we're going to be talking about, we all set sail for New York in The Good Thieves. Now, Katherine describes herself as a possibilitist and a hunter of hope. And I really want to know more about exactly what that means and what that involves. So, Katherine, I'm so delighted to welcome you. Hello. Welcome to virtual Aberdeen, or as the locals call it, Aberdeen. So, welcome. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me in virtual Aberdeen. It's lovely to see you, Janet. And what a pleasure to be doing this. Even if it is online, it is still such a joy.
And where in the world are you?
I'm actually quite far north at the moment. I'm in Stanhope, where I've been for the last 3 months or so. I usually live in London, but my flat is being worked on. So we have had snow for the last 6 weeks, and I started off like a southerner, just incredibly excited and building 8 snowmen a day, and I have now started to see it as something that just sort of eats your ankles when you step out into it.
But that does sound quite exciting, and maybe you'll tell us why that particular area as we go on in this conversation. But although I did mention at the top that we're going to be talking about your new book, The Good Thieves, which I'm very excited about, I do want to begin by just talking about a very beautiful and very moving book that you've been very closely involved with. And I realise it's probably not going to show up particularly well, but it's called The Book of Hopes. Can you tell us a little bit about this particular book, because it's quite special?
Yes, so The Book of Hopes here, I have one that might be a bit less shiny. This is the paperback version that went free to 5,000 copies sent out free by the NLT, the National Literacy Trust. The Book of Hopes is an anthology of 133 children's writers and illustrators. And it came about because in early lockdown, when this pandemic first began, so it would have been March, April, I found myself very severely in need of hope. And I thought, if I am finding the world bewildering and difficult, how much more so must it be for children? And so I thought, where does hope come from? And I thought perhaps children's writers are natural hunters of hope. If you think of what is the job of a children's writer, it's to go out and find everything you find spectacular and exciting and true, and to pour it into a book for someone else to take out again. And so I emailed more than 100 of my colleagues, of people whose work I adore, and said, could you write something or draw something that wouldn't be about hope? So none of it is explicitly about, it's not lectures on hope, it's to create hope, whether that's through disgusting jokes or brilliant adventures or fabulous poems or real life essays about caterpillars which eat plastic, or the history of the hare, like the animal, not this hare. And the response, I probably emailed about 150 people over about a week. And I expected almost everyone to say no, because people were very busy and it was a very stressful, difficult, strange, dark, wild time. And almost everybody said yes. And for a couple of weeks, people were just sending these things into my inbox, and it was like this tidal wave of joy. And then my wonderful publisher, Bloomsbury, put it all together free on the internet, on the National Literacy Trust website, and it's still there. So if you are a teacher or a child or an adult or anyone at all wanting to read just a very short burst of something delicious, like a vodka shot of joy, then you can go and find it free online at the NLT website, just by Googling Book of Hopes. But also it is this beautiful book, and the back is all of the writers, and the cover is by Axel Scheffler, who did the Gruffalo. And then on the front, I love this. This is Lauren Child, one of the illustrators I adore most. This is a girl looking out of her window, and on the back, the birds of her imagination. And it has just been such a joy. And so many schools have started reading one a day just before lunch, or I get these letters from people reading them before bed and making their own books of hopes, making collages of hopes, thinking what stories would be for them like hope. All these fabulous descriptions. I got a kid who wrote saying, for me, hope is like a firework. And if I could, I would eat fireworks. And then every day I would feel like I had hope inside. And the response has been one of the most glorious things of my life. So although lockdown has been gruesome, the Book of Hopes has been a great delight.
Yeah, and a great delight for us as the readers as well. But the dedication in that, Kate, is particularly special given the last year as well. Do you just want to tell us a little bit about who this book is dedicated to?
So everybody who wrote for this worked for free. Nobody got paid. I didn't get paid. Nobody did. And the profits from this book are going to NHS charities together. And so the dedication says, this book is dedicated to the doctors, nurses, carers, porters, cleaners, and everyone currently working in hospitals. You are the stuff wild, heroic tales are made of. So it's a book written in love and awe and admiration of so many people putting themselves at risk to keep other people safe, which I think is a colossal thing to do.
Yeah. Thank you. And it is beautiful to read and just to look at as well, because the illustrations that are peppered throughout are absolutely gorgeous. So, well done for having that vision and that determination to pull that together with all the other children's writers. It is always an immense pleasure to read your work. And I can remember when Rooftoppers was first published, and there was a little buzz about, have you read it? Have you read it yet? And it was such a joy. And I feel like I've kind of been on the journey along with all the other readers as every one of your books appears in the world. And it feels like a real kind of gift to all young readers. I count myself as a young reader, but I have to say. So here we are. Here we've got the Good Thieves. And at the top, I mentioned that we've journeyed to Paris and Amazon and Russia and all sorts of different places in your work. And in this one, we all head to New York. And I'm always just, first of all, intrigued about how you choose your settings for your books and why you want to take a story into those places. So what inspired setting this one in New York? And it's New York at a very particular time in history, isn't it?
Yes. So it's New York in the 1920s, during Prohibition, when it was illegal to drink alcohol. And therefore, a lot of people were making illegal alcohol and smuggling it around America. And it was a time in which there was a sort of golden age of gangsters. There was a lot of crime. There was also amazing art, amazing dancing, amazing music. It was a city in the middle of change. It was a city on the brink of many different things. And I loved the idea of setting a story there. But really, it was for two reasons. One of them is that I just love New York City. It's one of my favorite places to be. Mm-hmm. And the other one was I wanted to write a story that would be about loving recklessly, about putting everything on the line for love, about very specifically breaking the law for love, about going hell for leather and just doing whatever it takes to make something that has gone wrong right again. And so I thought, well, where would be a place where you would go up against a dark, a dangerous figure And I thought, well, New York in the 1920s would be a place where there were con men, where you could find yourself swept away into strange, unfathomable adventures. And so New York felt like the right place to be.
And can you give us a little taste of the story and the atmosphere that you've created in this book, and just read a little bit from The Good Thieves?
I would love to. So The Good Thieves is about a girl called Vita who comes over from Britain to New York to look after her grandfather with her mother. And they discover that her grandfather has been cheated out of everything he owns by a notorious conman called Victor Soratore. And they're trying to make it right with lawyers. But this was a time where you really only got a lawyer if you had money, and everyone else was just stuck. And the adults are trying to do it the adult way. And Vita can see that that is not going to work. So she decides to take things into her own hands. And she's going to break into the old ancestral home and steal back that which was stolen from them. But she knows that to do that, she's going to need help. And so she puts together a team to pull off a heist. And I love heist movies. And I guess a heist would be different from a normal crime. And then I think of a heist as having multiple people, multiple moving parts, which all have to fit together like a puzzle, and a twist. I think it's not a heist unless there's a twist. And so she knows that she'll need someone to get up and over a wall. So somebody who's good with heights and with ropes. She'll need somebody who can tame the vicious guard dog, so someone who's good with animals. Somebody who can pick a lock, so somebody who is swift with their fingers and a little bit lawless. And herself, she's the girl with the plan. And at this bit in the story that I'm going to read, the girl who is the brilliant lockpick and pickpocket, a girl called Silk. Her real name is Susanna, but she hates it, so you have to call her Silk. She has been arrested and thrown into a prison cell in the jail in Brooklyn. And now we know she's a great lockpick, but she has nothing to pick the lock with. And so this is...
I think we may have lost Katherine for a moment. Let's just see if she comes back. You're back.
Sorry, did my internet wobble?
Just a little tiny bit. Did you start reading? Because you might need to take us back to where we lost you just at the point where you were introducing Silk, and the point where Vita recognises her talents as a lock picker.
Right. So Silk has been thrown into prison, and we're going to have to get her out. And one of the ways that I wanted to make this story work was I wanted animals to be worked all the way through it. And Arcady in this story is a boy who belongs to a traveling circus that has arrived in New York City. And he has a tame crow, one on each shoulder. And I did quite a lot of research into crows while I was working on this story, because crows are amazing. If you disturb a crow's nest, they will remember your face and come after you if they see you for 3 years. And crows can operate vending machines. And I read this amazing story about a group of crows who had been educated in an amusement park in France to pick up litter that people have dropped, but they've been trained to pick it up and fly it into a dustbin in front of the person who just dropped the litter. So you're being publicly shamed by a crow, which I just thought was fantastic. So I knew that I wanted these crows, these brilliantly clever animals, to be part of the heist. And this is how they break Silk out of the prison cell. A crow flew in through the front door of the police station the next morning, as calmly as if it were coming in to report a missing package. Arcady, who had carried the crow on a streetcar down to the Brooklyn Bridge, cast her in through the doorway. He whispered, "Good luck," and ducked out. The bird alighted on the desk, and for a split second, nothing happened. Then somebody began to scream, "Get it out, get it out, it's unlucky." "Don't be stupid, that's magpies." "I don't care, it's filthy, they carry diseases." The policeman behind the desk took a great swipe at it, and the bird took off. She swiftly became affronted and confused. Crows, when affronted and confused, are apt to dive bomb the nearest living thing, and soon pandemonium reigned. Silk sat on the bare bed of the barred cell she had spent the night in. She radiated despair. At the shrieks, she looked up and saw the bird. She approached the bars, a slow and steady presence in a room full of screaming and flailing. She remembered the bird's name. Rimsky, she called, and the bird, harried now and panicking, swooped towards her, her beak still cramped around her prize. Silk stretched her arm out through the bars of her prison, and the bird landed on it and dropped her cargo, nipping at her thumb before taking off again. Silk winced. Bird affection, she thought, was a painful thing. Eventually, the panic died down, and Rimsky was caught in a tea towel and cast ignominiously into the street. Nobody saw Silk slip something silver grey that the bird had brought into her stocking and sit back, quiet, in the corner of her cell. She unplaited her hair and let it fall a protective curtain over her eyes. It was a good thing nobody saw her face, because try as she might to disguise it, now Silk radiated hope. All that Friday afternoon and night, Silk radiated waiting and hush and countdown. At last, as the clock struck 3 a.m, the officer on duty laid his head down on his folded arms for an illicit nap, and Silk slipped the tweezers that the bird had brought out of her woolen stocking, twisted them 4, 5, 6 times in the lock, and crept on soundless feet towards the door. A man in the cell next door, ex-army, with soot in his nails and a dog on a string, saw her go, but he only rose to stand, snapped to attention, and raised one hand in a salute he hadn't used for many years. And Silk returned the salute as she slipped out into the New York City night. And that's how the crows become part of the crime.
I love the crows throughout the story, and I didn't realize that about them. Clock in your face, I'm never forgetting you. It's just brilliant. Let's talk a little bit about Vita, who is a really interesting character. She's really smart and very insightful and very good at making plans, which is her kind of, I suppose, superpower is being a good planner of how to take things forwards. But she has a slight disability through a childhood illness. And so she's almost invisible sometimes to the grown-ups around her, because all they can see in a way is her disability first, and therefore underestimate her, which she can also use to her advantage. You know, she's wise enough to see how she can get around people in that way. So can you talk a little bit about Vita and where that idea for her as a character came from?
Absolutely. So Vita comes from lots of different people. Vita, the character, had polio when she was a child, like many, many people did in the 1920s. And as a result, her foot has, as she grew, turned in on itself, which means that walking for her is harder and running is much harder. That's based on a man I know who is in his 80s now, who grew up with a foot exactly like that and who never allowed it to stop him. But of course, it did shape his life in some ways. And he would say that it made him funnier and sharper and take no nonsenser. And I wanted Vita to be a little bit like that. I also wanted her to be, she's a sort of detective. She's a girl who is absolutely determined to put all pain and all doubt aside in her sort of fervent quest for right. And in that, I wanted her to be a little bit like the hard-boiled, noirish detectives of the 1920s and 30s, who often also had a physical difference that had marked them out from the general norm. And then also, I wanted a character who would be part of this wider movement in children's fiction currently, that up until really quite recently, physical difference and physical disability have been used to mark out evil. Like if you think of all the baddies in James Bond or Captain Hook, the idea that if you were physically different, scarred on your face, you were the baddie is just such nonsense. I mean, words that I would not want to say live on a live stream. It's nonsense. And I wanted to be part of this understanding that we have reached and are now trying to disseminate as far as possible, that physical difference doesn't make any difference except insofar as it means that you bend your life to meet it, and in so bending discover spectacular things which other people might not have discovered. And the wonderful, wonderful children's writer called Kerry Burnell, who a lot of people might know because she was on CBeebies for a long time, who was born without her lower arm. She very kindly read it for me, and we discussed what difference in disability would do for Vita, and that was a wonderful thing to have. And my own sister has disabilities, and I just wanted to write a book that would say, you can still run at the world, you can still bite the world, you can still put your mark on the world, no matter what your body shape is.
Yeah, and Vita certainly does. And it's her grandfather that she is determined to protect and to get back what's been cheated and stolen from him, which is this incredible castle that came from Scotland brick by brick. So it was dismantled in Scotland brick by brick and transported to the United States by Vita's ancestors and rebuilt. Where did that idea come from?
So that was a real thing, which I just found so insane and so evocative. In the 1900s and 1920s, there was this fashion, mostly amongst the super rich, but also among just some fairly ordinary people, of buying enormous buildings, or in some cases small chapels, from Italy and Ireland and Scotland and France, knocking them down, putting the stones in one case, 7 different ocean liners were needed to transport this castle over the ocean, and rebuilding it on America. So you would have, these very classic colonial era white clapperboard houses, and then you'd have a massive castle just on the banks of the Hudson River. So that's where that came from. I just thought that it would be that kind of edge of strangeness that I wanted to have in the story.
Yeah, and it certainly is. And Vita's grandfather has fallen on slightly harder times as well. And so there is a lot for the young characters to overcome in order to, I suppose, bring back what is rightfully her grandfather's. And he is a lovely character. And I just wanted to talk to you about some of your adult characters, because sometimes in children's writing, the adults are just kind of pushed out of the way and don't really have a role to play. But you're very good at writing these characters, like the grandfather, like Charles in Rooftopers, who are, although grown up, very childlike themselves and are able to embrace possibilities and adventure and have that childlike ability still within them, which I always feel sits beautifully against the baddies who've lost all that entirely from themselves. So do you want to kind of talk a little bit about why you like that kind of what we might call a kind of opposing natures of these kind of characters?
I think the thing exactly that I wanted with my adult characters would be adults who have not forgotten the truth of what it is to be a child, and who are fully grown up and drive and have true responsibilities and are in no way feckless, but who are remarkable in their ability to still feel in their fingertips the astonishment that you feel when you're a child. And there's a bit in Rooftopers where I think it's Charles, somebody says, everybody has a little bit of strangeness in them. It's just a question of whether or not you decide to keep it. And I love in real life people who have decided to keep their strangeness, and people who have decided to continue to believe in possibility, whether that's the possibility of political change or of love or of just doing reckless things in the hope that they will transform you. And so I just wanted to put that against the idea of people who have brought wholeheartedly themselves to believe the expensive lies that we tell each other sometimes. People who, Victor Soratore in The Good Thieves is somebody who has chosen to believe that the world is dark and the only way to operate in it is to be as rich as possible so the darkness doesn't touch you. And there are many people in real life who have decided to believe that. And I wanted to write a book that would show a clash of that against something bigger and bolder and tougher.
I can see from the chat function, we've already got some good questions coming in. So just to say to all of you out there, keep your questions coming in, and in 2 seconds, we shall head over to the chat box and have a look and see what's in that. But thank you so much, everyone. I just very quickly wanted to touch on some of the other characters in the Good Thieves. So we've got to still talk about Arcady and Samuel, who belong to the circus that is in town at the Carnegie Hall. So it's not a circus under canvas, a big marquee like we would expect. It's actually inside, and there's a brilliant scene with the horse galloping through the ballroom. And I assume that too is based on actuality, that the circus did move into the Carnegie Hall in the 20s.
It really did. I found a New York Times article that described, so that the quote in The Good Thieves, she reads a newspaper review, a quote, which is the actual newspaper review from the real New York Times of this real circus. And it said, elephants, ponies, dogs, and other familiar attractions of the Tanbark, which is just a posh word for circus, will be seen in Carnegie Hall this season, organized by the Parents Association of New York, which means that there were really elephants in Carnegie Hall. And Carnegie Hall, for those who haven't ever seen it, is the poshest concert hall, where you usually have beautiful piano playing, the occasional opera in New York City. But it's right in the center of New York. So for the elephants to have got there, they would have had to walk down Fifth Avenue, 7th Avenue. And so I wanted to conjure up that world where there were elephants marching under the skyscrapers of New York City, and also acrobats and trapeze artists. The boy Samuel is a genius child trapeze artist. Arcady is a sort of animal whisperer, but they all have one thing in common, which is that none of them want there to be elephants in the circus. They all believe that elephants, although remarkable to see them in amongst, newspaper sellers and hot dogs and traffic lights, that they don't belong there. And so one little subset of the story is also what will happen to the elephant.
And let's talk about Samuel, partly because I also want to ask you about training on the trapeze, which just sounds amazing. And where that idea of that flying through the air, and what inspired you to also train as a trapeze artist. What did you just kind of wake up one morning and think, today I'm going to be a trapeze artist?
So Samuel is, I can't remember if I ever say how old he is. Perhaps I better not say out loud. I always know how old my characters are, but I try to keep it secret because I want other children to picture them being whatever they want. So Samuel is a gifted trapeze artist, and he is a much better trapeze artist than I am, because you're allowed to do that when you're a writer. So as research, I thought I would go and learn the trapeze, and there is a flying trapeze in Regent's Park, one of the big parks in London, and it's there every summer. And so I went and I learned, and I loved it so much. The thrill of it, that you learn how to fly, and they catch you and you go flying in their arms over through the air. I also saw a young woman who was really quite good at it, but she landed badly. She was a sort of semi-pro, and she got her finger caught in the catch net, and it was hanging off that way. And so I was also very aware that it is not a risk-free pursuit. And I was trying to do this, you do a backflip to dismount, and I was trying to do a triple backflip, and I didn't, and I landed on my face on the net, and I went blind in one eye for half a day, which also felt a little bit like, I bet Dickens never went blind in one eye while he was researching his fiction. It may have gone a bit far, perhaps. But it was this lovely thing that I often say to children when I go to schools. One of the best things about being a writer is you get to do things that you would long to do anyway. You get to go places you want to go anyway. That I went to the Amazon to research the explorer, and you get to tell everyone that it was very serious research for your novel, which is one of the best reasons to be a writer.
And you get to eat tarantula spiders as well, don't you?
Exactly. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that?
Yeah. But that idea of the research and the travel, because you also, when researching for Wolfwilder, have learned about wolves and, you know, living in the wild, and experienced that as well. So is that quite important to you, that ability to immerse yourself in a sense of place and the atmosphere as you're progressing a novel?
It really is. It matters enormously to me to be able to get as much reality into my books as possible. So I went to meet wolves for the Wolfwilder. Rooftoppers is based in part on my lifelong pleasure in climbing. I used to climb buildings, and I also walk a tightrope. So I think it's partly because I want my stories, they are wildly unlikely adventure stories, and I want them to be the kind of story that, you know, grabs you by the wrist and won't let you go. But I also want them to have just the possibility they could be true. So the historical details are always right. The food is always, I try to make all the food that's in my book so I know what it really tastes like. I want to have them sort of heated by the fire of a maybe, that it could just barely be true. That's the kind of space I want to operate in. The everyday and the impossible, and I want my books to be that.
That actually is a nice way to link to a question that's come in from Neve. Neve is 9, and she asks a very sophisticated question. So the Wolfwilder, in that, when Theo is making the compass, can you actually make a compass by doing that? So where in the real life imagined is the making of that compass sitting?
Thank you, Neve, for such a lovely question. You can absolutely make a compass like that. You have to be quite talented. It involves a bowl of water and a needle, but it absolutely does work. And it's one of those tiny little things that I sort of hope that people might try. Like, I would like people to read my books and try the things in them. Obviously, please don't start a Russian revolution, or do actually, we could do with some revolutions. Please do start a revolution. Please don't go climbing across the rooftops of Paris, because that is spectacularly dangerous. And I am already to blame for one child's shattered ankle, and I don't think I could take another. But all the little details, like in the Good Thieves, for instance, the descriptions of exactly where it aches in your hands and knees when you fly on a trapeze, those are real. The ways that Arcady interacts with his dogs, that's based on real performing dogs. Silk's ability to, Silk is the pickpocket, and she has a skill whereby she can take $50 out of your wallet, take the pen out of your pocket, take the ink out of your pen, roll the $50 up, put it where the ink was in your fountain pen, screw it back up again and put it in your pocket, all without you noticing. And that is based on a real man called Apollo Robbins, who can actually do exactly that trick. So they always have bits of reality, and I always hope that someone might read them and think, I'd love to try
that. There's quite an interesting question which has come in from Megan, and she is 8. And she's wondering if you've got any plans to write a book that's set in Scotland.
Oh, Megan, that's such a lovely question. I would love to write a book set in Scotland one day. I love Scotland. Going up for the Edinburgh Festival is always one of the best bits of my year. I think I would have to spend more time there before I could really properly make it real. I think you have to know a place quite deeply. So I would have to read about it. I tend to read about a place, watch documentaries, go there, speak to people from there, and research the history of there. And those are the 5 things that feel to me important before you start your writing. My next book, I mustn't say too much about it, but I can say it's not set in any country any of us have ever been to. So that's going to be different. That won't have quite the same research, and instead I'll be reading myths and things like that instead.
Oh, that sounds really intriguing. Here's a really interesting question, which picks up on the idea of books in translation, and the idea of when your writing is translated into many other languages and goes out across the world. And Carmen, who I think from the question is a teacher, says that her students love reading the stories from the Book of Hopes. And she is in Romania. So she's just wondering how you feel about the idea of your books in translation going out to the world. And do you know when a book is translated? Do you know which languages your book is in? Can you read any of those languages yourself?
So I think that being translated is one of the greatest joys of being a writer. I'm in 33, maybe 35 languages. Some of them, when it's a very, very small print run, for instance, I think in Latvia, they might sell 500 copies and then far more in, say, China or Germany. But it is just an enormous privilege to think that somebody is sculpting your story into a new story, because I think translating is never as simple as just putting each word in a row. It's working out which jokes will work and which jokes might not work. And, the whole texture has to be summoned up by the translator. It's an amazing job. I can only read French. So I've read the French Rooftoppers, which is called Le ciel nous appartient, which means the sky belongs to us. But I get brilliant letters from children who have read the books in other languages, and that is always such a joy. I just wish that I could read, for instance, the Indonesian one and know where they might have just, had to tweak the joke a little bit to make it work for their audience.
Yeah, completely. And sometimes as well, character names need to change, because sometimes a name could mean something in another language. I find it absolutely fascinating, that whole process of not only translating the books that we read in English into other languages, but also that opportunity to read books from all around the world that have subsequently been translated into English. And it's a real skill, it's a real craft and art form. I quite like this question, and I'm wondering if maybe it's a bit of a leading question. So it's from Bella. So don't know if Bella rings any bells for you, but she's wondering if any of your characters were inspired by people you were at school with.
A few of them, yes. So I think all of your characters are always based on yourself, because you are the only human heart that you know truly, intricately and fully. But then I always steal bits from other characters. So for instance, in Rooftoppers, the character called Gérard, who lives on top of Notre Dame and is a musician, is based on my brother, whose name is Jared, but also Gérard, because part of our family is French. And he was a musician. And some of the other characters who live up in the trees are based on some of my best friends. And there's always just such delight in just taking little bits from people and putting them into your stories. And of course, people you don't like can become your villains. But of course, I wouldn't say publicly who that might be.
There's a brilliant bit in which we'll come on to in a second, in the Sky Steppers, with the characters that live in trees, where one of them picks a nose and wipes it on a passing squirrel. So I want to know which one of your friends that's based on. Not the nicest of habits. There's a great question, actually, which is a very good question from Izzy, and it's one that I had in my mind as well. So Izzy says, in the author description part of The Explorer, it says that you were learning to fly a plane. How's that going?
Well, it was going pretty well. Obviously, now it's not going at all. I spent part of my childhood in Zimbabwe, where a lot of my friends still live, and where my family usually lives in Harare, in the capital of Zimbabwe. And so I used to go back every year to visit them in January. And while I was there, I would learn to fly this tiny little aeroplane. It was called a Piper Cub. It was the sort of aeroplane that you might have seen in movies flying in the Second World War. It's just two-seater and bright yellow and so beautiful. And I was learning with a wonderful instructor who was of the kind who let you take risks that he had absolutely no business letting you take, because I was, but I just loved it. And the thing I discovered with flying is taking off is really easy. You genuinely just point the aeroplane in the right direction and pull back. Flying, once you're up there, is wonderful. You control the throttle with two handles, and you can tip and glide. the really difficult bit is landing. And that is the bit I am not very good at. And that is the bit that you want to be good at in an emergency. So the only time that I landed a plane myself, like fully, without help, I asked my instructor, how did I do? And he said, technically, but really only technically, no one died. And I was like, oh, thank you. And that's not really a compliment, but that is roughly where my flying is. So it hasn't progressed very much, but it will when I am next back in Zimbabwe, which I hope will be maybe next January.
So talking of childhood, Sam, who's 10, he would like to know what your favourite book from your childhood was and why.
Ooh, that's a great question. So my favourite writer when I was a child was probably a writer called Diana Wynne Jones, who I just adore. I think if you liked Harry Potter, but you also like sarcasm and irony and really sharp jokes, Diana Wynne Jones is for you. She's like a even funnier, wittier, more biting Harry Potter. And I think my favourite book of hers was it was called Charmed Life, about some children in a castle with magic fighting an evil wizard, long before Harry Potter, or a book called Howl's Moving Castle, which is a brilliant cartoon by Studio Ghibli, a Japanese filmmaking company. And I think that those would be absolute dream books. So if you haven't read them, those are spectacular books.
Sam, you can drop into the chat box what your favourite book is so far from your childhood. You've still got a little bit to go. Henry, who's 12, which is a link question, he wants to know which of your own books are your favourite, if it's possible to have a favourite.
That is a lovely and very difficult question. I think the thing that writers always say, which is just a get out of jail free clause, is the one I'm writing now, because the one I'm writing now, I can still hope will turn out to be perfect. And really what happens is you have the idea for a book in your head and it's like a golden castle. And then what you manage to get down on paper often feels like a sort of garden shed in comparison. And so while you're writing it, you can still hope that your book might turn out perfect. But other than that, I think there are bits that I've loved writing in every book. Like I loved writing, there's a final showdown between Soratore and Vita in The Good Thieves. And she feels her terror and she acts anyway. And I loved writing that. But then I loved writing the aeroplane scenes in The Explorer and the tiny wolf pup in The Wolf Wilder and the scene on the tightrope in Rooftoppers where they stand above the city, wobbling on a tightrope, feeding pigeons from their bare hands under the stars. So there's always just bits that I have loved rather than one favourite book, I think.
That's a very diplomatic answer. I didn't know whether to cover the ears of your books I've got sitting here beside me so that you didn't get upset. But that idea of favourite bits in your books, for World Book Day, which I'll just show everyone, you have gone back to one of the characters from your very first book for Sky Steppers, which is a little novella revisit to the world of the rooftops in Paris. So just, the last little bit of the event, can you tell us a little bit about this, which is literally, it's just published, isn't it?
Yes, so I think it's out next week. So it is a World Book Day book, which means that if you are a child in the UK, you can get a voucher and you can exchange it for one World Book Day book for free. And otherwise they're £1, so they're a real bargain. And this is based in the same world as Rooftoppers, which is a world of children who live secret, wild lives up on the rooftops of Paris. And nobody knows they're there because they hide and because people always forget to look up. And when it's too far to jump from rooftop to rooftop, they string a tightrope between the two rooftops. And the bravest of the boys in Rooftoppers is called Matteo. And this is the story of how Matteo ended up on the rooftops. And it's also the story of a treasure hunt and a race against time with a man who knows that somewhere in Paris there is hidden spectacular treasure beyond your wildest dreams, and that there are clues leading from place to place, and at the end there will be the treasure. But if he finds it, he wants to destroy everything good in the city that these children love. And so the rooftoppers are up against him in a race, and they have to follow rhyming clues. They go to the great ruined palace of Versailles, where the French kings once lived, which was then briefly abandoned before it was made very, very smart again. And you can now go, and it's a beautiful museum. And they go to the Louvre, the most famous gallery. They go to the Arc de Triomphe. It's an enormous 50-meter high arch in the center of Paris, and they find a gang of girls who live wild, quite ruthless lives in the trees in one of the main parks of the city. And together they band together and go up against this man. And that is the story of Skysteppers.
The girls in the trees are just inspired as characters. I completely love them. And also just the idea when you do climb trees, the thought of being able to live up there and kind of look down on everyone else. And there's a brilliant description as well of the difference between the world on the rooftops and the world down on the pavement. There is a couple more questions that have just started to pop in. Harris would like to know what actually inspired you to become an author.
Harris, that's a lovely question. I would say I have always loved books, and I have always known that reading books feels like eating or like swimming in the sea, like some very rich, natural pleasure. And also when I was young, when I was maybe 12, the things I loved most were reading and eating and gymnastics. And I was never going to be a good enough gymnast to become a professional gymnast. Eating is tragically not a job. And so it was going to have to be something to do with books and with reading and writing. And I love this idea that your job, your actual job, that people pay you enough to buy food to eat, can be just dreaming things up and putting them down on the page and imagining stories that you would love to go on and saying, what if this happened? What then?
I like that idea of not being able to eat for a living, so choosing instead to write. I think I would find it easier to eat for a living than the challenge. I mean, I'm completely in awe of every writer that I read. And there we're going to have to leave it. I would like to prod you a little bit further on the book that you're working on, but I sense that you might feel that you're not quite in that space to tell us too much more about it. But do you know when that will be published and when we can look forward to reading it?
So that will be a little while yet, because I haven't really properly started pushing it into shape yet. It's still ideas. And I have this other job, which is that I hold a research fellowship at Oxford University. And so currently I'm actually writing a book about John Donne, the Renaissance poet who lived at the same time as Shakespeare and was one of the great, great love poets who has ever written in English. So that will be for adults. So that's what I have to finish before I'm allowed to go back fully to my children's books. I'm just getting the final details done now on John Donne.
Well, that's pretty exciting because I am a huge John Donne fan. And also I like the fact that in all of your books, animals are a key part and really important characters. So I'm looking forward to your take on The Flea by John Donne, who, for those of you out there who don't know, John Donne did write a love poem involving a flea. So pretty unique, I would say, on that front.
One of the great love poems of any age. Who knew that fleas could be so glamorous?
Completely. I'm so sorry, everyone in our virtual audience, but we have come to the end of what has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. So thank you so much, Katherine. Before you all go, I do just want to say that Granite Noir's book-selling partner is Waterstones, so you can go to their website, which is waterstones.com, and you can get your copy of The Good Thieves from there. So I hope you can attend more of the Granite Noir events. They are all criminally good, And I'll be back tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. with the writer M.G. Leonard for a story of adventure, travel and murder. So look out for that. All the events are going to be available online on demand, so you can view them at your own leisure, and they are all completely free of charge. So if you felt able, then you can donate to Aberdeen Performing Arts and support the ongoing work of the amazing Granite Noir Festival and events like this. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you in the course of other events over the festival. But I just want to say a massive thank you to Katherine Rundell, and I really look forward to talking to you again, hopefully. But perhaps the next time we're chatting, we'll actually be together in the same space and able to see the audience. In the meantime, take care. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.